Entering level 1-4 in Super Mario Bros. It becomes quickly apparent that despite being one of the first courses in the game, the castle stands out by its natural difficulty and menacing tone. Where simple enemies normally pose a danger, the stronghold solely consists of far more stationary traps and even widens the danger zone of bottomless pits by shooting lava bubbles from below. It's in this case where the game tries to build up a somewhat formidable boss fight and introduces players to Mario's all-time arch-enemy, Bowser. From the tips of his toes to the point of his horns, the King of Koopas represents an early final stand and therefore is the combination of every enemy type in the game. He jumps like paratroopers, throws hammers like Hammer Bros, is immune to conventional attacks like Spinies, and even shoots fireballs ahead like upcoming bullet bills. Hardly surprising, there's no direct way of defeating him, which is why it's necessary to overcome the opponent by relying on the basic gameplay learned up to this point, and consider Bowser as a brief platforming challenge instead. This trend of defeating him indirectly should jump and run through future installments and often make up for amazingly staged encounters rather than actual battles. The expected escape fight is meanwhile the norm, and although there are a few occurrences where it's required to confront Bowser face to face, they are still the exception. What has changed, however, is the general impression of the antagonist. Since the NES could only somehow portray the characters and their design to some extent, it was up to the player's imagination how Bowser would really appear. Is he an animalistic monster without any sense of grace, or a devious villain that is named after Korean soup? While the answer is clear today, there's no denying that the once threatening image of an unidentifiable foe changed to a likable antagonist who surely fulfills his role perfectly, but yet has to show the other side of his coin. What I basically try to say is, it's hard to make a good Bowser fight. Alongside the release of Super Mario 3D World for the Nintendo Switch, there wasn't much anticipation of how much new content would be included to the port. At best, a handful of new level or new playable characters would expand the already comprehensive game, adding basically more of the same. Instead, in a game where Bowser ironically could not look less intimidating, they decided to fully focus on his monstrosity and finally reawaken the King of Koopas. Before looking at the game as such, it's important to notice from which foundation Bowser's Fury is built. Unlike other titles in the series, this mode is attached as a self-contained side adventure that shares basic elements like the controls and many level design concepts with 3D World. Probably the best comparison is Galaxy 2, which started its development as an add-on but was later shifted to a fully fledged game, therefore borrowing many ideas from its predecessor but elaborating on them as well. Even though Galaxy 2 eventually became its own game, it's actually quite interesting to see that Bowser's Fury actually embodies what Galaxy 2 maybe could have been in its own cosmos. While Bowser's Fury may not follow this example to the same extent, it differentiates itself by the simple act of altering the gameplay with a few yet perceivable changes. What comes first to mind is the flexible camera movement similar to 64, Sunshine or Odyssey. 3D World allows camera movement to some degree, but mostly fixes the perspective in order to not complicate the control of the multiplayer too much. With the 4-player mode gone, there's no reason to restrict the player similarly, representing a significant disparity to 3D World. As contradicting as this may sound, it also proves that opposites attract and help lesser experienced players to make their first steps into the genre. Despite the great commercial success the 3D Mario titles enjoy, it's nothing compared to their 2D counterparts due to the beginner-friendly perspective and controls they offer. Navigating in the 3-dimensional room can be still overwhelming for some players, which is why 3D World strikes an appropriate balance between those two dimensions. With the clear start and goal in mind, they can get accustomed to the movement in uncluttered level, and after finishing the main game, use their experience for something greater. Even camera control can be trained during the Toad level because they focus on perspective and limit the movement options. Reflecting upon them side by side, the normal and Toad level result in a perfect combination of training two different purposes that are linked all together to movement. Normal level that focus on controlling the character, and more puzzle solving courses that concentrate solely on tilting the camera. At this point I would like to commend the developers for still offering Bowser's Fury right from the start, instead of unlocking it after beating 3D World. Maybe a little hint for lesser experienced players would have helped, but this ultimately comes down to something that is unconnected to the actual game. 3D World might be a good starting point when in reality beginners use their knowledge from a completely different game. Just like with basically every Nintendo console, children will have their first experience with Super Mario depending on their age and current access to devices. At the date of Bowser's Fury's release, this introduction was, taking account of the immense success, Super Mario Odyssey. Naturally, Nintendo had to assume that many players already played their first title in the series and probably got accustomed to Odyssey's gameplay. This thought process is proved by Mario's slightly expanded moveset that feels noticeably faster than the original and adds even a little dive, identical in execution like an Odyssey. It wouldn't even be that surprising if many players accidentally try to throw ahead, realizing how much muscle memory Odyssey trained in. The only incomprehensible absence depicts the missing addition of a proper triple jump. Thanks to the faster running speed, each character naturally jumps higher, and they probably wanted to keep each protagonist's moveset in check, but this wasn't and isn't a proper excuse. 3D World's level doesn't provide very much exploration and can easily be abused by the cat power-up. Bowser's Fury, on the other hand, isn't structured like 3D World at all, which makes this all the more questionable. Besides minor moveset similarities, Bowser's Fury furthermore orientates itself towards Odyssey and features a self-contained open world without any loading or selection screens in between. This is the first time a Mario game, despite the open nature of some predecessors, consists of a solely single world, which is only possible because of the clear scope it strives to maintain. No one knows what the future will hold, but it's not hard to deny the unimaginable idea of Mario going all out and build on a truly grand open world. If anything, it's the 3D platformer genre that would benefit from a larger foundation, because running and jumping works best when it's not interrupted. Looking back, there was a time when Nintendo felt considerably more comfortable leading Mario towards his linear roots again. While the shift to 3D walked along the tendency of leaving straightforward level design behind, 2 years later the novelty would long since fade away and leave developers in the position of impressing players with novel concepts instead of an additional dimension again. With a clear start and goal in mind, it's much easier to design courses around a single idea and direct players solely as it's prescribed. The results speak for themselves, as Galaxy and all the future titles until 3D World focus on the stigma and are rewarded with excellent reviews and sales. Even though Mario seems to feel much more confident on that score, there's still the drawback of linear levels having a clear end. Platforming works best if the gameplay is continuous and interrupts the moment-to-moment gameplay as few as possible. This is also the reason why many players dislike 64's or Sunshine's mission structure, or even worse, the Green Stars from Galaxy 2. Instead of offering additional discoveries, it can often feel like lingering in everything but the actual level, due to every opening cutscene, loading screen and finishing moment. The task of finding the green star falls short and contradicts not only with the chosen level design structure, but in a way the genre as well. Players want to keep running and jumping as continuously as possible, which is why most people start to perform some kind of movement when heading to the next destination, even if there is no reason. Only very few players will rigidly walk all the time if there are options to execute acrobatic techniques while marching, so it's important to design these techniques as exciting as possible to make uneventful parts in between the main missions still enjoyable. Bowser's Fury misses this chance and lets Mario perform the same jump without any alterations, which doesn't quite fit the open structure of the map. To compensate for this, the game chose some concepts that would make traveling much more engrossing. Like most of the ideas, Plessy makes a direct return from the main game and plays very different from 3D World. Rather than only appearing in certain occasions, the player gets access to Plessy all the time because most of the world is connected via water passages. Due to this accessibility, Plessy doesn't feel like a one-timer for a few levels anymore and even emerges always near the player rather than staying at the place he was left. Being relegated to a supposedly mere means of transportation, it's surprising how smooth the transition from jumping on the ground to traveling through the sea can feel, thanks to refraining from certain Plessy spots or other reasons of restriction. The developers even made it sure to fill the sea with short challenges that keep attention a sufficient way, although all the islands aren't very far apart. Power-ups power-ups follow a similar trend and appear at first glance especially unremarkable, yet being the probably most interesting feature of Bowser's Fury. The reason why they seem so unimportant is because of the establishment as a classical Mario element, but it's necessary to notice that this is the first time classical items are featured in a three-dimensional title like 64, Sunshine or Odyssey. The Galaxy games also let Mario turn, for example, into his classic fire outfit, but these power-ups were only temporarily and didn't even work in the slightest like their 2D counterparts. The same goes for the caps, nozzle, equipments or captures. They also fulfill a similar role, but 3D Mario games usually avoid having to recurse to what is related to the traditional 2D games. One thing that always seemed rather inconsistent with traditional power-ups is their tendency to work like additional health energy at the same time. Because of that, the developers could never proceed on the assumption that the player will have a power-up equipped, because he loses one after getting hit, so the level design could never truly focus on specific abilities and had to always include additional paths. This is also the reason why some of Galaxy's or 64's power-ups are timed. They had to work only in a very specific scenario and could not be equipped in other parts of the game. With the cat suit having such a universal efficacy for basic platforming, it might be disappointing to see how Bowser's Fury doesn't fully commit to one power-up as well. But this problem is circumvented with one very minor but substantial difference. Unlike in 3D World, it's possible to store multiple items individually and either pause the game to directly choose the preferred power-up or equip it automatically in order to keep the gameplay flow. Consequently, the player can always adjust himself to his current situation by either changing his status to something safe that fits platforming sections or to an offensive type for more stationary obstacles. This flexibility fits the open style of the game perfectly and truly undermines how two seemingly polar opposites, namely the traditional power-ups in combination with leaving a health bar behind and an open world, can result in one coherent package. As a result, this well-known system of health relying on the current transformation feels fresh again and even brings in a strategic aspect that was never seen in former installments before. The catsuit in particular benefits from the open world the most, since it's naturally designed to interact with all kinds of surfaces. Newer players can even get the impression that the catsuit was created for Bowser's Fury, since it's great fit for the world, overall almost exaggerated cat theme and compensation for the lack of variant movement options in base form. They don't go as far as I would like to take the concept of strategically switching power-ups, but like the rest of the game, it feels like a proof of concept that certainly establishes its merits at least on a surface level. One thing that leaves this level assuredly are all the islands, basically the main obstacle courses. In most cases they build on a particular idea from 3D World and therefore reuse most of the game's groundwork with a different twist. The ice shoe, for example, was very situational and always felt like a supplement instead of an element, which the course was designed around. To say Bowser's Fury solves this problem completely would be exaggerating, since most ideas only get one dedicated section for themselves, but most of them still feel unspent, demonstrating how much value a single concept possesses. The islands even change up some aspects and enemy types after some while, which gives off the feeling that something is always different and worthwhile checking. Much like the Captain Toad level from 3D World itself, it often becomes apparent how each island basically feels like the continuation of this concept and shows what they would look like if Mario took over the role of the playable character. Before Toad was chosen as the protagonist, the developers considered Mario but were unsure because he would just jump over every obstacle, making each level bigger than needed. Bowser's Fury's islands target this foundation and share more similarities with the Captain Toad level than expected. It's possible to freely view each island from the outside like a diorama. They feature self-contained challenges in their own space and even forego time pressure because there's no second player who holds back the group. The only way of playing together is Bowser Jr., the companion and support character for this game. Instead of playing like a fully owned character, he essentially functions as a noticeably improved version of Galaxy's or Odyssey's multiplayer, in which another player could barely assist but not really intervene. Alongside basic movement, he can also attack, stomp, collect cat pieces and even draw paintings in order to create items. There are even very situational moments where he can be used as a platform to either reach high places or extend a jump. The multiplayer does not portray the single player though, as he will automatically and even potentially annoy more than he helps. Luckily there's the minor but greatly appreciated option of adjusting his activity, although there's nothing like a small child finishing up his furious father. As far-sighted as this option may seem, there's no alternative to swap the run and jump button or turn on auto run, which seems bizarre considering how the level design isn't built around slow walking in the first place. The developers probably wanted to keep the controls in check with 3D World, which is why it's all the more strange to offer no option to choose a fitting control scheme. Much like 3D World itself, the majority of the game is naturally nothing new, something 3D World shared when it's released. At first glance, 3D World is brimming with new ideas, when in reality it borrows some of the best ideas from each mainline Mario game up to this point. They are the power-ups from Super Mario Bros., the playable characters from the Western release of Super Mario Bros. 2, the Tanuki and World map from Super Mario Bros. 3, the Mega Mushroom from New Super Mario Bros. DS, the multiplayer from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, golden items from New Super Mario Bros. 2, basic gameplay ideas and many concepts from Super Mario 3D Land, Rosalina from Super Mario Galaxy, and many more I probably haven't noticed. Since 3D World isn't the newest game anymore, Bowser's Fury could borrow ideas from games being released afterwards, mainly Odyssey. Where 3D World almost reutilizes ideas from the 2D games, Bowser's Fury continues this trend and orientates itself much more on the 3D titles on top of the already existing callbacks. It takes the aforementioned dive, open playstyle and death punishment from Odyssey, adds a passive second player in the form of Bowser Jr. like in Galaxy, several reminders, collectible shines and the paintbrush from Sunshine, and probably many more. Even the progression system is tied to Odyssey's idea of consistently rewarding the player with some kind of discovery, except the total count of shines is not swollen and kept to a reasonable amount, fitting the great replayability the shot length supports. Assessing all these points as such, the game already provides more than enough ideas and novel concepts to justify its existence, but becomes truly exceptional when the rain starts to fall. Cat shines might appear as means to progress, yet only serve the purpose of defending the player from the real barrier that gives this game its identity. In periodic intervals, Bowser awakens from the center of the map and starts to attack the player either for a short amount of time or retreats after collecting a cat shine. With such an ominous force kept in mind, it's actually quite easy to foresee the appearance due to the different state Bowser goes through when accumulating strength. If anything, the possibility to predict his awakening makes him all the more dangerous, since he doesn't feel like a random factor and will always be in the mind of the player. It's for that reason why he's placed at the middle of the map, so the player can see him from every angle. Still, with a total of 100 shines, there will be always a collectible close at hand, inhibiting Bowser's supposedly overwhelming menace a little. Even death or just a few seconds stop his rampage, and considering how indifferent a loss is, there's actually no threat coming from Bowser after a while. There's only one occasion before the final where cat shines no longer drive him away, which ultimately became the most enjoyable moments of Bowser's Fury. It was quite surprising to learn that there's no hard mode after beating the game, which would let Bowser rampage from shine 1 to 100 without a single break, because it felt like a given considering Bowser is the main feature after all. Instead of hindering the player and dwelling on him tediously, Bowser feels like a supplement to the level design and can even considerably add to either the difficulty or enjoyment. While some players surely find his appearing annoying after some while, it's hard to criticize the game for this fact since it's so easy to chase him away and the transition is so seamless. If anything, the developers should be respected for how difficult it must have been to design each island with Bowser's attacks in mind. There are different hideouts and even short rocks hidden everywhere, so there will be always an opportunity to find protection even in the most desperate situation. The same amount of attention has gone into the soundtrack as well, with each island featuring its own tune and little details that will surely go unnoticed. For example, when Bowser turns back into his former self, the soundtrack becomes a variation of his Fury mode and regular form from 3D World, whereas only for a brief moment Bowser Jr.'s theme from Galaxy 2 plays shortly before the end. There are many more, like Mario's voice echoing in small rooms, Bowser Jr. laughing when Mario's getting hit, or his overall increased tendency to show more character like in Odyssey. Coming back to Fury Bowser himself, the Propeller Island is a great example of how Fury beams supplement the scenario by adding an obstacle instead of forcing it into the situation. Where the challenge once was composed of gliding with a propeller box, Fury Bowser adds a hazard from the side and changes the premise of dexterity into something more action and fast-paced orientated. Of course, this means that not everyone will stumble into the same situation. For some players, Bowser will only only appear during the most inconvenient moments and therefore annoy the player as much as he would enhance other occasions, but this is actually the point. As much as this may sound counterproductive, the idea of a giant Bowser raging in an open world at every possible time sounds just too interesting to abandon the idea because of a few unavoidable downsides. With certainty, the developers are fully aware of the negative aspects some players might experience, but sometimes, as a creative person, it's just necessary to commit to a riveting idea that doesn't forget what made the franchise great in the first place, at the cost of excluding players. It's basically what Nintendo does since Super Mario 64, wishing good luck the next title will please itself with its unique concept. Although this comes with the risk of creating too many fan groups of different playstyles, it only shows how a basic idea leads to the chosen overall design. Cleaning wide areas of sludge with water makes sense in open fields and a vacation place, whereas complicated geometric shapes achieve their goal best in a galaxy setting and linear focused level. The same goes for the open world of Bowser's Fury, which had to be chosen in order to achieve the goal of Bowser appearing at any time at any place. Having such a wide, uninterrupted world, the opportunity for a giant boss fight only seems natural and is initiated if enough cat chains are collected. By transforming into Giant Cat Mario, this clash is one of the rare times in which the player gets to fight Bowser directly in a 1v1, not a chase or escape scene, but an actual fight. The cat power-up in particular lends itself perfectly due to its flexible moveset and even allows to directly hit Bowser rather than waiting for a cooldown phase. Although I criticize the power-up system for its inconsistency, here it shows its benefits by weakening the player after getting hit and forcing him to act passively for a short while. It's still possible to throw Bowser's projectiles or wait for a counter-attack, but the fight ultimately becomes more engaging because of the constant back and forth between Mario and Bowser. To make clear what differentiates this fight from other installments, it's important to clarify why some final battles don't hit their mark. Just like water levels, auto-scrollers are something not every player is a fan of, because they determine the pace, which is why it's actually quite surprising how often Bowser finals backslide to them and therefore feel a little unsatisfying. 3D World's final is great on its own good, but comes off as a glorified cutscene and even takes the opportunity to still hide collectibles, although it's supposed to be the final clash. Dying suffers from having to wait the whole way through as well, and Bowser actually isn't stupid enough this time to either hide a self-destruction switch or stand on the power block. If there's one thing that still carries over from previous installments, it's the reuse of Bowser battles with only slight changes. Naturally, it's required to fight Bowser more than one time, but sadly the battles doesn't change enough and only add an attack at best. I'm also not very fond of cat giants weakening Bowser in advance, since the fights are greatly staged but aren't as hard as it might be expected. Luckily, there's one final phase which incorporates Blazzy and finally reverses the roles by letting Mario chase Bowser after a long time. At the start of this video I stated how Bowser is shifted from this menacing looking beast to an evil caring father, but the probably most surprising irony though is the premise of a father-son vacation that just turned into chaos. Even though I enjoy this rare depiction of Bowser, it's hard to deny that Fury Bowser is the fantastic exception to a probably better fitting rule. Bowser's Fury is the result of a focused idea that could only unfold thanks to its short length and lucky position to act like an add-on that actually constitutes as the perfect counterpart to 3D World. Although many features like power-ups seem to be a direct transcription of traditional elements, the new orientation towards a somewhat open world moves them to a novel context and proves how slight adjustments can even make 35-year-old concepts exciting again. Thanks to the uninterrupted level design and constant opportunity to change abilities, Mario probably never felt more flexible to control, which can be applied to almost everything happening in the game. Power-ups can be changed on the fly, collecting cat chains only occupy a few seconds, and Blazzy can be accessed from any point. It's this continuous commitment to undisrupted gameplay from start to finish, which is probably one, if not the biggest achievement the game gets right. Even Bowser seamlessly appears without any sequences and finally reflects the dangerous, intimidating creature that was held back all this time. Bowser's Fury demonstrates many things, whether it's the reusability of game engines released over 7 years ago, Mario exploring one connected world, or in this video's case Bowser's interpretation of a once fearless creature. But the probably most interesting outcome will be what kind of trace this giant beast will leave.